Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the December meeting of the Governors and Audit Committee. Everyone's welcome one and all. We'll get right on the agenda by noting apologies for absence. I've been notified of 4. Those are Martin Veal, Colin Prosser, Anne Webb and David Jones. Otherwise, we're all present and correct. We move on to declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest to note, please, from members? Nope. Great. We'll move swiftly on to item 3, the public open forum. This, as a reminder, there's an opportunity for members of the public to attend or make representations to this meeting. Wendy, do any members of the public wish to address this committee?
I haven't received any requests.
Thank you. In which case, if we could move on to the action list. If we could start with action number 1. Action is a verbal update on finance team capacity. We've had a couple of updates over the last few months at previous committee meetings, which have been helpful. But John Davis, Head of Finance, could you give us a verbal update in terms of current position, please, and then any issues arising?
Afternoon, Chair. Thanks, everyone. So I guess in terms of update on what we've discussed previously at committee, we've made some good progress just in terms of identifying a proposed solution, I guess, to that wider finance restructure. A paper's been drafted, and I'm currently looking over that at the moment, just to identify, I guess, whether it gives us that overall level of cover as a whole finance cadre, I guess, across the authority. So I'm hopeful of that being brought together now, probably post-Christmas, for some degree of sign-off, and I'm happy that the existing temporary arrangements that we have in place across the services at the moment provide that, I guess, temporary robust level of cover that we need. Obviously, a busy time for finance teams leading up into a budget needing to be set in the end of February. So it is drawing on a lot of finance time at the moment, but that is being covered off sufficiently at the moment, in my view. So I'd be hopeful of bringing back a more substantial and hopefully final outcome to committee, if not at the January meeting, because I know that's quite early in the month, certainly through by the February committee date.
Okay, thank you, John. So that was a helpful update. On that basis, is there anything you need from the committee at this stage ahead of that paper being considered?
Nothing presently, Chair. I think if yourself as Chair of the committee would like early sight of that once it's in a semi-final position, I'm very happy to passport that through to give you, a early sight and a level of comfort, I guess, that those arrangements being put in place. But no, nothing from the wider committee at the moment.
Thank you. And yes, I'd quite like to see an early version of that paper, please. And Wendy, if you could note that paper being brought forward out to a January or February meeting. Thanks, John. Okay. Action 2 is not due until the January meeting, so we won't consider that at this point. Similarly with item 3, which is complaints report, that action will remain open until we receive the next report, so yet again we won't consider that. Action 4 is in respect of the risk register. I do note that that's on the agenda and I'm content with that paper, and on that basis and subject to views from colleagues, I'm happy to close this action on the basis that we have a paper later on. Item 5 is 2 separate items in respect of essentially what policies this committee should consider as part of its remit. I'm slightly unclear in terms of when we expect this item to be closed out. I do note there's some reference to it in the risk paper, but I do wonder whether I could ask an officer, possibly Richard Jones or Peter Davies, to confirm when they expect this action to be closed out, please.
We can start, Chair. See Peter's got his hand up as well. So just to highlight, members, in terms of the risk management item on your agenda, we've highlighted within that report some of the key risk management policies that feed into our strategic risk management policy and guidance for you to consider today. And we've also proposed that as part of your review of the risk register itself, you may want to identify where there are further risk controls in place to manage those strategic risks that you could consider looking at or referring to other committees to look at as well. So we provided that initial list. I think then in terms of the next step, we've outlined in the report, we are reviewing our strategic risk management policy and guidance. We're looking to bring that forward in terms of the changes to you in April. As part of that review, we'll be looking across the variety of risk management arrangements we have in place that feed into our strategic risk register, and both seeking assurance around their effectiveness of the delivery for those currently in there, and identify if there are any further that need to fit in and under as part of that policy. What that will give us, and hopefully will give the committee, is a defined list of those that fall within the committee's remit as being part of the strategic risk management policy framework, and that then could come forward, if appropriate, to this committee to look at. As part of that, we'll also identify where their existing reporting arrangements are in line with the action as well. And also a key role for that will feature the Council's corporate governance working group, which we've talked about previously to the committee, and that will be taken forward now in line with the new head of law and monitoring officer who's come in place, and we're looking to meet in the new year, and those changes and updates will be considered in line with that group as well. So hopefully it's an initial update for you today about what exists currently in our risk management policy, and then in terms of next steps, what will come in April as we review the policy and bring that through to you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So April is the due date. Peter Davies, Deputy Chief Executive, I did notice you raise your hand and then put it down. Do you wish to add anything at this stage, or are we content with Richard's update?
It's a far more eloquent response from Richard than I could have ever provided, so thank you, Richard.
Great, let's move on. Item 6 is in respect of this committee being kept up to date in terms of delivery models for internal audit. I'm content that we close this action because I think officers clearly understand the need to keep this committee engaged and updated in terms of developments in this space. So if we could close that action, please, Wendy. Item 7 is in respect of counter-fraud, corruption and bribery policy. There are a couple of actions here. The first one being with Peter Davies, Deputy Chief Executive again, and indeed the first couple. Are you able at this stage, Peter, to give an update in terms of these actions, please?
Apologies, Chair. Difficulty getting the mute off then. Sorry. First of all, so can I just confirm, are we on action 6 rather than 7 at the moment? You're dealing with them in a bundle?
7. So 6, I suggest we close because there's a clear acknowledgement that you'll need to keep this committee updated on developments in that area. So for me, it's item 7, the whistleblowing et al.
Okay, so this is currently in train at the moment. I'm just working this through with Sally Thomas, HR manager, because I think, as you'll recognise, I'm sure Matt who's on the call as well. Matters of whistleblowing are generally administered through Sally and with HR, given obviously the nature and confidentiality of those matters. I know that the meetings are in quick succession, so hopefully it's only a matter of a small number of weeks delay, such as we can close this action off at the January meeting.
Okay, thank you. Noted. If we could move the action forward to January, please. Thank you, Peter. And then item 8. Item 8 is respect of the Council's financial position, both in respect of the in-year deficit and then the longer-term MTFP budget planning process. Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, and I talked about this briefly in the pre-meet a week or two ago, and I understand Peter's comfortable in giving us a verbal update at this stage. So, Peter, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know the members, and for very good reason, have got very clear interest in the council's financial situation, both in the in-year and obviously moving forward into next and beyond. I think it's been made known previously, just in terms of the extent of the financial challenges that are with the council. We reported in late July early signs of further in-year overspend. Just for members, just to remind them that the last financial year, that's the 22-23 financial year, was a particularly challenging and difficult one, brought about by the cost of living crisis and obviously all those impacts of demand and inflation. And we were required to have recourse to draw on additional one-off use of reserves in order to arrest the situation. I mentioned last year, just for the simple point of reminding members that we had an improved situation towards the end of 22-23, but notwithstanding that, it was still a significant in-year overspend. But it did allow us to not draw down fully on the level of headroom of reserves that we set aside for that particular in-year challenge. So as I said, we reported in late July, again, further in-year overspend. That triggered further work that was instigated through August and September, budget recovery action, and that was brought back through Cabinet as part of the month 5 report in November. I'm pleased to say that, and I'm very grateful to John and the finance team's wider leadership and obviously colleagues who have worked tirelessly, really, just to bring the extent of those budget recovery actions forward. And we were able to report, as part of the month 5 report, a much reduced overspend. It was a very small overspend reported, which we're very closely tracking, and equally to highlight that we've strengthened our governance arrangements internally as a consequence, I guess, of the level of in-year distress that we've obviously needed to try and address. That's seen the creation of a financial management board that has met weekly since September. And that board, I guess its remit, if I was going to describe it in simple fashion, is one of looking to maintain oversight with regards to formally and firstly the development of the financial the budget recovery plan for the in-year position. But it's evolved beyond that now to continue to evolve some of the good practice that's sort of taken place across the authority, but is equally taken on board a role with regards to the budget process for next year as well, because of the natural crossover between the two. So, strengthening of governance arrangements and certainly an improved position at month 5. We've got a month 6 report that's due to go to Cabinet next Wednesday, John, I think, isn't it? Which will highlight that I guess the position is being sort of maintained in terms of sort of recovery action. We are seeing some slight deterioration in some areas, but we've been able to counter that with some improved savings and outperformance in some of our corporate areas. But we're not out of the woods. I've made that quite clear to staff and to leadership when I've spoken to them of late. It is still a situation whereby we carry degrees of budgetary risk. specifically those centre around assumptions that we've got in place for specific grant funding that we still are hopeful to receive going into the end of the financial year. And clearly the circumstances of demand have not fallen away. I don't think anybody in the committee would think that to be the case. So social care and homelessness, two particular areas that remain very, very challenging for us. And I think then finally, in terms of the budget situation, so you naturally expect us to be in early December to be reasonably well advanced in terms of the budget setting process. I think John was probably underplaying the comment a few minutes back when he said that this is quite a challenging period for us and the finance teams. It is. Yeah, it's we're operating on a number of fronts at the minute as a result of circumstance that I've obviously just talked to, and we took a report through Cabinet again last month at a special meeting in the middle of November, which looked to provide update publicly and to Cabinet in terms of the budget context that we were facing for next year. The extent and the level of the budget shortfall that we were modelling, and to the approach that we were looking to take, which contained a sort of budget framework and a set of budget principles underpinning that, which John had put good work to, and we were able to obviously get Cabinet comfortable with that framework and principles. And obviously the hard work's been ongoing alongside that to address a large projected overspend for next year. The point I think we probably make in most arenas when we talk about the budget, it's a very dynamic process, and one thing is for certain is the figures are going to change every single day, and they do. We just need them to go in the right direction as a collective. But I think we're probably in what I personally describe as the sharp end of the process at the moment, because we will need to release out, or Cabinet will be looking to consider and release on public consultation its draft budget proposals at its meeting on the 17th of January. And I'm sure the committee can well understand that we're in the back end of the process at the minute with budget proposals looking to be finalised, and obviously we're running concurrent with that the quality assurance and review process, both in terms of the lens that is applied on savings proposals, but equally in terms of budget pressures that are being added into the budget as well. So all of that is ongoing at the minute. Cabinet's obviously got a very clear interest in terms of the impacts of savings proposals, with the likes of Rich and Matt on the call at the moment. They are integral and involved and engaging with chief officers and DMTs in terms of those impact assessments, obviously being worked through, and Cabinet obviously having a very clear line of sight, I guess, in terms of the judgments that they need to take in terms of putting a composite set of budget proposals together. Ones that ultimately, and certainly for the purposes of fiscal responsibility or otherwise, need to be balanced. So clearly we need to bring a set of balanced proposals together by the time we get through to council next February. But clearly there's some, given the extent of the budget shortfall that's needed to be addressed, this is a particularly challenging year. And Cabinet will be left with taking some difficult decisions, I guess, and in terms of what is put forward for consideration. So that's really where we're at the moment. I've taken up a few minutes, but I'm sure that would have probably helped yourself, Chair, and the committee in understanding as to where we are on both fronts.
Thank you, Peter. From my perspective, that was very helpful. You very eloquently set out the challenging financial position and the significant work you and the wider finance team are doing to try to address that situation. I am pleased to note the strengthened governance arrangements you've alluded to. I think that's important. And of course, you've also referenced the fact that proposed expense savings being sort of impact assessed. Yet again, that's important. So the arrangements you are establishing and following through on sound to me reasonable. I think it's fair to say this committee's had, to date, limited visibility over that work, and I do really welcome the verbal update you've given this committee. And I would reiterate the importance of ensuring this committee is provided with adequate and timely information on the financial situation, but more importantly, what officers are doing to address the situation. I think that for me is critical for this committee in terms of being able to discharge its responsibilities. Those are my comments. I look to colleagues for any comments they wish to make at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate Peter's position. It's always difficult at this stage. Nobody really quite knows where they are. It's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes, not knowing what the Welsh Government provisional settlement's going to be until just before Christmas doesn't help. I look forward to being able to look at the mandates when they're finalised. That'll give us a much better indication as to where we are.
Thank you, Phil. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Peter. I know that a lot of concern has been expressed about the time lag on reporting, financial reporting, and the months. We're a couple of months behind on occasion. So I'm greatly relieved to know that officer group, budget monitoring group, is meeting weekly. Can you confirm that it is looking at accurate and up-to-date information, even if there are delays, which we understand, before that information can go to the public domain? That even though it sometimes feels as though the driving looking in the rearview mirror, I think is the phrase that's being used, that certainly at a chief officer level, that is not the case.
If it's okay to respond, Chair, absolutely the case whereby the Financial Management Board presiding over the most up-to-date information. That's not only the case with the formal budget monitoring reports, which obviously are taken through Cabinet and obviously made public. We don't formally report every month. That would be a burden too far really on the finance capacity that we've got, and notwithstanding that, I don't think I'd ever look to want to propose that regularity of reporting. But just to confirm that we do still undertake monitoring behind the scenes on a monthly basis, and as John always coordinates those levels of update into Cabinet informally, just so that they're kept aware of progress being made. And I guess probably say, and it has happened in the past to the extent that we have any level of significant deviation from month on month in between those formal reporting periods, then formal reports can still be brought forward. It's quite a rare occurrence for that to happen because we've usually got a pretty good grip on what's actually happening on the ground. So yeah, I think that's probably enough to answer Councillor Birch's question.
Thank you. And yes, well, I mean, we know that a lot of those savings mandates are extremely challenging operationally, and that there are various things where we're not in control of demand, as you said. But in bringing forward the saving mandates for next year, is one of the aspects being looked at there that it's savings mandates being brought forward where there's a potential for that to create additional cost, additional pressure elsewhere in the organisation or down the pipeline? For instance, a reduction in early intervention work, creating demand elsewhere in the organisation, that's being captured and taken into account.
Yes, I think it's just a natural course of the budget process, really, and in terms of senior officers and budget holders who are obviously putting shape to those proposals. They're working very closely with finance. They're working very closely with, as I said, Richard and Matt and the team, just to make sure that the outcome and impact, I guess, and the consequence of those budget proposals is understood. I think you've already acknowledged it, Councillor Birch. It could be quite a difficult balancing act, and particularly where for the finances of the council are under such strain, and you're having to in effect react to heightened levels of demand. I think we would probably all want to be in a fully preventative world, but in order to be able to achieve that, that would draw very significantly, extensively on the council's resources. So as I said, it's always a balance and always a difficult one.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, let's move on then, please, to agenda item 5, which is the Treasury Management Activity Update for Q2. I think this paper's been introduced by John Davis, Head of Finance. Firstly, John, thanks for the paper. Please assume we've read it, but nonetheless, draw out key matters of note.
Thank you, Chair. So I think members will probably appreciate that we've done a significant reformatting of the report since our Q1 update that came through committee in July, I believe it was. So we've tried to bring out, I guess, some of those key issues into the covering report. We've moved the detail and the workings that make up all of that into a summary appendix. I'm hoping that provides a bit more clarity for the committee moving forward. It's not perfect. I'm sure we'll change it again for Q3, because I think it's an evolving piece of work. This was a new requirement this year to report quarterly on Treasury performance. So welcome any further feedback committee has on the format of it and the information that's contained within it. As ever, it's a complex area. Lots of abbreviations and metrics that go into it, but hopefully we've captured those key issues. So I guess overall, loath to say it's a fairly static and uneventful period for Treasury management, but it actually is, despite some of those metrics changing quite considerably. I think it's just the nature of the wider economy we're in. Certainly at a local level, there's been some consistency, and we haven't seen a huge amount of change within some of our data. So just taking it in order, I guess, we have seen resolutely high cash balances over the period. Probably lots of reasons going into that, but probably the main one being that we're seeing early payment of grants into the authority prior to them needing to be expended. So we're benefiting from that. But likely also seeing some of the benefit of the wider policies in place and I guess tactics that have been employed to arrest that in-year budget deficit that Peter's just covered off. So all of that is playing into some of those higher cash balances that we're seeing. So consequently, our borrowing hasn't moved significantly during the period. Overall, a very minor variance, but I think members of the committee will probably be pleased to note that one of our LOBO loans, so that's lender option, borrower option loans, has been redeemed over that period. So the lender chose to exercise their option and proposed an increase, a significant increase in rate on that loan. which we had the option not to accept, and we repaid it in full. We didn't choose to refinance that directly at the time. We can manage that from cash balances at the moment, but members will probably be pleased to note as well that just after the second quarter closed, we had a further notification from another lender that they were also exercising their option for a £7 million Lobo loan. And we've chosen to repay that in full as well. We've actually refinanced that loan at slightly cheaper rates than it was running at. So a pleasing outcome for both of those, which means that our Lobo balances overall are down to around £3 million. I say it's pleasing because, whilst they were a product of their time when they were taken out probably about 20 years ago, and were at competitive rates at that time. They are quite inflexible, so we're open to that option being exercised by the lender at any twice a year, and it therefore means that I guess it's not very flexible. We're exposed to that decision. And it doesn't really allow us to make an early choice as to what we're going to do when that lender exercises their option. So it is pleasing that balance has now reduced. Just moving to investment activity. We've seen the benefit, I guess, of the bank rate rise over the period. That's raised to 5.25% overall in terms of the Bank of England rate. We are expecting that to probably remain at the peak for the current time now. All signs from the market is that is what's going to be expected. So we've benefited from that in terms of some of the rates coming through that we've been able to secure on those investment balances during the period, which were up to 55 million at one point, but ended the period at 34. The pooled fund balance that we have of £4 million continues to return over 6% in terms of income returns. However, that capital position is still showing a loss overall, which we're keeping a close eye on. A sign of, I guess, where some of those markets have been and still are, even though we've seen a little bit of a improvement since the quarter end. I think it's important to note that we hold sufficient reserves in our treasury reserve to cover those losses at the present time, despite them being covered by regulation that allows us to carry that loss on the balance sheet. The only other point, just in terms of investments, is around our approach to ethical and sustainable governance. We have, during the quarter, opened an account that is specifically focused on ESG approaches, and I guess gives us a level of proactive approach to aligning with the resolution that council made some time ago now to move towards improving our policy of ESG investment. And similarly, we have reviewed all of our investments against the charters, which pleasingly now are supplied by Treasury advisors across the board. We were an early adopter of that at the beginning of this year and sourced our own information. Luckily for the team now, we don't have to do that, which is excellent because it saves us a lot of time. But we are excluding any organisations that don't sign up to those charters, and we won't be investing with those going forward if that's the case. Just finally from me, I guess in terms of our non-treasury investments, so members will, I guess, commonly refer to those as commercial investments, but you know, they are wider than that as well. We do hold some investments of legacy industrial units and portfolios and county farms, but in terms of the main three or four that we usually report to committee on, Newport Leisure Park continues to provide a net income stream to the authority. Once rent-free periods end, that will be above the 2% expected return after all borrowing costs are allowed for. So certainly positive progress in terms of that investment, which has, you know, returned income for the authority since it was first purchased those few years ago. So that's a pleasing update in terms of Newport Leisure Park. Castlegate is still providing a net negative return on investment. Members will be aware of the loss of a significant anchor tenant probably back about 18 months ago now. So, you know, that position is continuing to improve, and we're hopeful of seeing net positive returns for, once some rent-free periods end as we go into the next financial year. Just one final point of note was in relation to a commercial loan that we've disposed of over the period that we're reporting on. That followed an administration process, and a buyer was identified by the administrators, and they chose to repay the loan in full, including the outstanding interest, which was a pleasing outcome for the authority, and certainly interest over the life of the loan was, I think, around £160,000. We can't put a percentage return to that because, you know, there were many different facilities and drawdown periods within that commercial loan. But you know, I think members will be aware that that loan wasn't specifically focused on commercial return. It was looking at the wider deficiency in our broadband networks around the county, and was looking to also harbour, I guess, improvements in those kind of non-finance benefits that we saw from that loan. So, Chair, I'll leave it there. I think that's the key points of the report. So welcome any questions the committee may have.
Okay, thank you, John. Much appreciated. I'll start by reiterating some of the points you made about the paper itself. I thought the paper was excellent in terms of the structure and clarity of messages. It was a significant improvement over the previous version, which is great. And I'd like to express my thanks to you, John, as well as Daniel Francis, for work done in terms of listening to the committee's feedback and addressing it. So thank you for that. I'll now turn to members. I'll start with John. John Crook, please.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, John has answered some of my questions, really, but it's just a couple, really. Commendable, I think, for paying back the loans. Certainly, we wouldn't be in this situation this time next year, would we, to undertake that? And I think that's commendable on all your parts, really, for doing that, paying back those loans. A couple of questions. Newport Leisure Park has obviously been sort of struggling for some time, and obviously, you know, in a much more position, you're telling us that we're going to be able to get a better capital return going forward. I question why we need to give such long rent-free options, and why we continue doing that, really. And also, then, if you look at Castle Lee, I mean, we're providing a net ROI at this moment in time, but I think you're assuring us that it's going to be in a much better situation in next year, 2024. Okay.
Thank you. Chair, if it's okay, I'll respond to those. So in terms of Newport Leisure Park, yeah, I think it's important that we remember that since investment, this has provided a net income stream to the authority every year. So effectively, that is income that has meant that we haven't needed to look to reduce other services in the council, or we haven't had to look to generate further income through whatever means we would through the budget process, whether that be to recourse to council tax rises or increasing some of our charging. So that is a pleasing outcome, and I think that shouldn't be lost within the reporting of the performance on that investment. In terms of rent-free periods, I think we just have to be mindful that we're in a commercial environment with some of the options that we have to give and concessions we have to give. So, when we're looking to attract organisations to the site, we have to be competitive against the kind of wider options that they may have. What I would say is certainly a filled unit within the park is better than unfilled, purely from the optics of investors. So, whilst we deal with a slightly lower return during that rent-free period, it also goes to demonstrate that we're at full capacity, and if further rent negotiations occur with existing tenants, that plays into a stronger hand for us as well. So lots of things going in to those negotiations, but we're happy that the team sitting behind those with that external advice is on top of that. Castlegate, I think to my update earlier, it's that loss of an anchor tenant was significant, and that space has pleasingly been filled by one of the existing tenants in the other area of the site. And the amount that is left is again undertaking negotiation now with interested parties. There is going to be a period of rent-free or concession on some of those rates in the early periods, but it's certainly a pleasing improvement on where we were 18 months ago. And yes, we are hopeful of that returning to a positive net return in the next financial year.
Okay, thank you. Tony, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan. My question is about 7.4, the Broadway Partners Limited. Was an innovative idea from the previous administration when a scheme was developed whereby residents in non-receptive areas of Monmouthshire would benefit by enhanced broadband. Broadband Partners became into administration, and this other company has taken over now. Was there any thoughts on the authorities still retaining that broadband scheme to the benefits of the residents who didn't have or had poor reception? And was there any mileage in seeking that? Whilst I understand that the loan has been repaid and we're in square one, but will our residents in northern Monmouthshire, particularly in rural areas, lose out because this other company has taken over, or will it become more expensive for them? Was there any mileage in us continuing as an authority? Thanks, Chair.
So, Chair, if it's okay, I'll maybe come in to deal with this question. It's
please.
not really for John to sort of consider response on this one because he's not been involved, certainly not to the extent of Councillor Easton's question. So I guess just to sort of touch on what I can touch on. So Broadway went into administration. We had not released all of the initial commercial loan that we had originally intended to, and to stimulate the type of connectivity that Councillor Easton has talked to. And I guess if you think about full fibre broadband to your home, and that's generally commercially viable in an area where it's beneficial for providers to do so. If you're living out in the sticks on a mountain somewhere, the cost of actually taking that full fibre connection to that house is very expensive. So Broadway had a USP and in being able to reach over large geographies with wireless broadband solutions that could be carried at pretty high speeds. So the company sort of didn't fully look to roll out in the way that we were expecting them to our benefit, and it's for that reason that the very specific requirements within the loan agreement weren't fully exercised. But notwithstanding that, the company went into administration for other reasons. I think it's fair to say that the broader general direction in the market is actually in the full fibre space. I think government funding now at a sort of BDUK level with central government is very much geared towards providers going down a full fibre route. That's where all the government funding and incentive is. And I guess it's led to a lot of smaller providers being consumed by some of the bigger players in the market. I guess to Councillor Easton's question, I mean, I think we've done very well through the process of the administration. And it's a key point for Governance and Audit Committee. We've had the outstanding loan that we had at that point that they went into administration returned in full, and all our legal costs met. So from that to that extent, it was a good outcome. I think the thing that we're still to wait and see is as to how the new company that's acquired broadband as part of the administration, as to how they, together with other providers in the market, the likes of BT and Oggy, will actually look to reach out into those rural hinterlands of Monmouthshire to provide that level of connectivity. I think it's probably a step away from Governance and Audit Committee, in all honesty. And it's probably something more for the relevant scrutiny committee to preside on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Peter. I agree. But thanks, Tony, for the question. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to add my thanks and commendation for the clarity and detail of the report. Coming fresh to this, by the time I got halfway through the report, I'd got a page of questions, and by the time I got to the end of the report, I'd found the answers to most of them. So that was really helpful. But with regard to the LOBO loans, I know that there has been controversy around this kind of borrowing for local authorities. And I just wondered how many other loans we have where they're likely to want to or need to refinance them, and whether you feel as overall that's a type of borrowing that you feel we should be managing out as an authority, or whether it still has a place in terms of the variations on rates and terms of loans of varying ages. And my other question was with regard to the loans to other local authorities, where given the pressures on local authority finance, do you foresee any risks attached to those? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So I think just taking Lobos first, yeah, absolutely right that there's been press coverage over the years in terms of the exposure that some of the public sector has to these type of loans. I think what I would reiterate is that, you know, when we first took these loans, I think it was around about 2002, 2003, they were very competitive rates at the time, as opposed to what we could have obtained through other means. So, you know, that it sat as part of a wider borrowing portfolio at that time, which was you know, acceptable in terms of some of the inflexibility that I spoke to earlier on. Certainly over recent years, in terms of where we've seen higher interest rates in terms of that UK bank rate, that would push these providers to reassessing the worthiness, I guess, of these existing loans that they have with various public sector bodies. So I think what we have seen, and partly linked to your second point, is some councils in the UK experiencing financial difficulties, and you know, potentially some of the lenders are maybe seeing that and wondering whether these loans may be better off their books, which they would do through, you know, taking that option to increase the rate substantially, knowing that those bodies would look to repay rather than accept the higher rate. So I think, you know, I'm happy that we've probably got the majority of them now off the balance sheet. I think certainly the options that we're replacing them with are more flexible and allow us to change our approach more easily as we move forward, should our capital financing plans change. What we are left with is one Lobo loan with a £3 million balance outstanding. I guess going forward, it's hard to say whether that lender would look to exercise their option. They may be very comfortable with local authority exposure or otherwise. We just don't know that from the commercial perspective. So, you know, we wait on that. What I would say is that, you know, with signs that we perhaps have reached a peak in terms of that interest rate environment at the moment, if that lender hasn't contacted us to date and you know, started that discussion, it's probably less unlikely that they would look to call that now moving forward, unless we saw another rate rise within the market. So in terms of our lending to other local authorities, those authorities which have identified issues, and you know, within the press, members would have seen lots of mention at the moment of Section 114 notices and financial difficulties for a number of local authorities, mainly across England at the moment. Our Treasury advisors keep a track of all of that and recommend that some, if not all of those bodies are removed from our investment list. So where necessarily we wouldn't then invest any monies with them moving forward. So that is tracked every day by our advisors. So we're comfortable that you know, we haven't got that exposure either to or from those other bodies. I guess what I would point out is that you know, we are a net borrower as the authority, so you know, it's more often than not that we would be borrowing from other councils. So that credit risk from our perspective is nil So I'm comfortable with that approach. So hopefully that covers off those couple of questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Phil, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Most of what I was going to ask has been covered now. Just a couple of comments, really. Good news on the commercial loan. As we said at the time, that was more aligned to getting the service out to people in Monmouthshire, and the whole reason for doing it with that particular company was the fact that by doing it we got to be first in the queue. So that was the justification for that. There was mention, John, you mentioned the 500 and whatever it is, 7,000 potential losses on the pooled investment, but that's of course only if we cash them. So they aren't losses really. So I'm not too concerned about that. Good to see the ESG coming in, and that's progressing. But the question I had, it could be in the report, but I can't quite remember. You've taken temporary borrowing of 5 million. Was that from local authorities? There was a reference in the report somewhere to temporary borrowing of 5 million, or have I invented that? It's just something that came into my mind.
So yeah, I think just covering off, and I know the comment around pooled funds was more an observation, but I think it's important that the members are aware of the level of potential exposure that is sitting there on the balance sheet. So we're obviously relying on Welsh Government regulations to be allowed to deal with that on our balance sheet. So just to make it clear, if that regulation wasn't in place, those capital losses would need to be borne by our revenue budget year on year. So the reasoning for the regulation is that local authorities aren't exposed in any one year to significant movements in those capital losses. That regulation is renewed every year by Welsh Government, so we just need to be conscious that there's a possibility and that it could develop at some stage that there is a decision not to renew that. So that's the reason we hold a level of Treasury risk reserve commensurate with, I guess, more than the capital losses that currently stand on those. So that gives us the coverage that we need in the event that those losses have to be realised. In terms of our temporary borrowing, so I think we just need to probably clear up what we mean by temporary borrowing firstly. So this will be commonly borrowing that is that has a maturity of less than 1 year. So it can be called temporary, it can be called short term. They're commonly used for the same to mean the same thing. So there is a table somewhere in the report that identifies our ratio of short-term to long-term borrowing. It's one of our indicators. So I think we're around 30% from memory. Can't see the table, but so what that means is that 30% of our loans, of our 180 million loans, mature within 12 months, and 70% mature after that date. We've reduced that exposure over the past 12 to 18 months. I think we were keen to get a little bit more certainty into our borrowing structure, and we've reduced that, I think, from about 40% down to 30%. So I think if there was mention of 5 million of additional temporary borrowing, that would just play into that overall balance that we have of borrowing under 12 months maturity.
I just found it, John. It's the last line of 5.5. If you want to see what I was actually on about.
Okay, so yeah, that's specifically looking at the change in that. Right, so yeah, I think that was referencing the repayment of the Lobo, what was £3.6 million. I think we chose not to directly replace that through long-term borrowing because I think if we just take it through to the position we expect to happen over the next 2 to 3 years, our advisors in the market at the moment are highlighting that we are potentially at peak interest rate, and they would expect that to drop back off over the next 18 to 24 months somewhat. So we're comfortable at the moment that we look to refinance that Lobo repayment, I guess, through temporary borrowing. And as part of our wider strategy, we'll probably look to take a longer term view of that as rates naturally reduce as per market expectations. So it's a wait and see on that whilst we fund it from temporary borrowing.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. I think we're about to conclude this item, so thank you, John, once again for the paper, very helpful. I think we can conclude this matter by saying that this committee has reviewed the Treasury activities and performance achieved over the period and are content with the information provided. Thank you. Move on then to agenda item 6. Agenda item 6 is the effectiveness of the strategic risk management framework. This paper has been introduced by Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager. I assume Hannah Carter, Performance Analyst, will chip in as well. So welcome both. Please assume we've read the paper, but please feel free to pull out the key points of interest. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you for that, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so reports provide you with an update on the assessment of the implementation of our strategic risk management arrangements. Thank you to the committee for your feedback on the previous report. So we have made a number of adjustments to it as a result. So just to highlight some of the more significant ones, under Part 1 of the report, we provided a more specific overview of the strategic risk register. This includes key amendments which for the reasons for changes in risk levels, the addition of risk scores, progress with plan mitigation since the last report, as well as identifying the risk owners who have agreed the update before you today. In terms of Part 2, we provided a more specific assessment of the effectiveness of our risk management arrangements, and these are structured under some more specific questions as well. We've also added to the cover report the Chief Officer's commentary on the effectiveness of the process. You'll see that in 3.11 and 3.12, and that's provided by Matthew Gatehouse, who's joining us on the call as well today. We've also identified, in relation to my earlier input to the meeting, some of those further risk control policies that sit within our strategic risk management policy and guidance that you may wish to consider as well. So just to draw out some of the key points in the report. I won't go into too much of the amendments. Those are covered in Part 1, and also we've gone through the risk register in detail at Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee a few weeks ago as well. But the key changes are there highlighted for the committee. In terms of Part 2, just draw out some of the key messages from our self-assessment of the effectiveness currently of our risk management framework. So under our first question around Are the strategic risk management arrangements communicated and understood? We've identified we've got an established strategic risk management policy and guidance in place that's operating within the council. We identified this can be strengthened, including in areas such as risk identification, risk appetite, responsibility arrangements and reporting arrangements, and that in reviewing this as part of a wider review of the risk management policy, we think this will help support and strengthen our risk maturity within the council, and obviously we'll be feeding back to the committee in April with the outcome of that review and the proposed changes to the policy as a result. In terms of the second question, is strategic risk management embedded in the council? We've identified that the update process, reporting arrangements in place demonstrate that this is embedded with key groups and officers with specific senior responsibility for managing risk in the organisation. Below these strategic responsibilities sit service level risk responsibilities, which are mainly done through our service business plans, and our most recent quality assurance service business plan shows that there's some inconsistency in how effectively risks are managed and identified in those plans, and so we've identified the need to carry out further guidance and training and support to services on risk management as a result of that. Moving on to a third question, is there a shared understanding of the most significant corporate risks? We've identified again that the structure and update process for this register ensures there is this shared understanding. In the summary of the risk register in front of you today and the full risk register demonstrate this. As I mentioned before, key part of our development is about ensuring this is embedded through all levels of the organisation, particularly with service level risk management arrangements. And again, we'll be tailoring our type of support and training to help develop that. And then finally, is a robust risk management assurance framework in place? Again, the report arrangements before you today demonstrate how we're self-assessing our arrangements on an ongoing basis. As ever, it recognises that our reporting arrangements can be further strengthened, and we'll be doing this in line with both feedback from this committee and our review of the policy and guidance as well. So hopefully it gives you a flavour about our own assessment of our risk management arrangements, and broader updates just for the committee's awareness in terms of our risk process. As the committee will be aware, there's a review of our strategic risk management policy on the work programme for internal audit. This audit is currently underway, and the outcomes of that audit will obviously be key in terms of our future assurance, so we'll capture that in the next report to you, subject to being completed in time, and that will also inform, as I've already mentioned, the review of our risk management policy and guidance where needed as well. And then finally, just to come back to the action list, which we talked about already, but just to highlight, in the report we've drawn out some of those risk management arrangements that already fit within our strategic risk management policy and guidance. So those are service business plans, emergency management plans, business continuity plans, health and safety procedures, financial regulations and insurance arrangements. And these may be things that, as we've noted in the recommendations, that the committee may wish to consider giving further consideration to. And as I've already covered, we will provide a further list as part of our review of the policy and guidance to you in April, which may identify further arrangements that need to fit within the strategic risk policy, and also an update on that assurance work we're doing for those existing arrangements I just mentioned and their fit and alignment with our strategic risk policy. So that's hopefully a quick run through of some of the key changes and assurance and our own assessments, but happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, so firstly, thank you, Richard, much appreciated. Yes, just to endorse some of your comments in respect of the much improved structure and content and focus of this paper. I thought, in a similar way, the Treasury paper was excellent. I thought this paper was excellent as well. It covers a lot of ground. There's a lot of detail here, which the committee needs to get into. But I do think we are provided with some assurance over your understanding in terms of your current assessment of risk framework and work being done to further strengthen it, especially bearing in mind the challenging risk environment that we operate within, as maybe reflected in paragraph 3.3, where a number of risks you've drawn out seem to be increasing. So clearly there's a significant task for officers to follow through on in terms of ensuring that the appropriate risk controls and mitigating actions are fit for purpose. And yet again, I think there's a role for this committee as well as the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee to fulfil in terms of reviewing the adequacy of those actions. So some great work here. I particularly liked the Chief Officer commentary shown at 3.11, 3.12. I think that type of attestation is really helpful for this committee. So thank you for, one, listening to our feedback, and two, addressing our feedback. It is much appreciated. I'll now turn to members. I'll start with John Crook. John, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would agree with you. A commendable, really, report. Just two items that stuck out to me was item 8, and that is the risk has increased from 8 to 12, and that's all around about absences from school. I just wondered how we could sort of get a finer or a tighter grip on that. And 11A, where we're delivering commitment to decarbonisation, would we be losing out on any grants that are available by putting that back from 2030? Is there any issues there? Again, that's gone up to a high of 16.
Thanks, that'd be a good answer. Please, find my place in the report. Firstly, around, I think Councillor Cook referred to risk 9, but I presume in terms of absence rate, risk 8, in terms of school, the risk around schools. I think, in terms of your question about getting a tight grip on it, I think obviously these are quite specific policy based questions. I think what I'd highlight in terms of the report is the risk level has been adjusted, reflecting that the progress has been made in terms of implementing the new school curriculum, but the risk level has increased, reflecting that the impact of the pandemic on attendance levels and also worsening behaviour in schools is what's causing that risk level to increase within the current year, and the subsequent risk then as mitigation actions have been updated to reflect the focus now on addressing that as an ongoing basis to hopefully mitigate that risk down. So that's really the rationale, I suppose, for you in terms of the change in that risk, recognising that the significance of that risk to attainment and the importance of having robust mitigating actions in place to address that risk as well. And then moving on again, in terms of the risk around the council achieving net zero by 2030, again, give a broader update in terms of the management of that risk. Clearly, to address that risk, there's lots of complex challenges the council has to address, both itself and also its commitment to residents to decarbonise the county as well. Some of the changes require changing our buildings, changing the way we commission our fleet, changing how we procure services, and that itself brings lots of complexity, brings a lot of challenges, but also in delivering that, it requires resources in order to achieve that. As we talked about earlier, and Peter gave an update, there's obviously challenges to the current financial finances, cabinets are putting in place to address that, and that will need to be, the reason the risk is identified is because it is a key community corporate plan commitment, and it's important where we identify a risk to one of our key commitments, we're capturing it under the risk management policy and guidance. I think what I would say in terms of key mitigating action, in terms of next steps to address that, is as the report identifies, we're developing a revised climate and nature emergency strategy that will align to that commitment in the community and corporate plan. One part of that will be particularly focused on our internal decarbonisation arrangements, and that will look to set out in any further detail how we're going to address that challenge, and obviously how we're looking to mitigate that risk to the commitment set out as well.
Thank you. Great. Okay, move on then to Tony.
Yeah, thank you again, Chair. Yes, Richard, you've highlighted 6 areas of risk which you consider increasing, except the last one, which has dropped a bit. But I come down to the second risk 2, as you say. Some services will become financially unsustainable. Is that shorthand for the feasibility of having a Birmingham or a Nottingham, is it, or such a situation like that? I'm not saying we are going down that route, but that is the ultimate end if you cannot provide the services or provide the only services which you've got to by law. We've got a £14 million gap, and it's continuing. I'm not to phrase this question, but how do you believe you're going to get ourselves not in that situation? That makes sense?
Well, it's very fortunate we've got the risk owner here, Chair, on the call. So I think it's probably beneficial for the risk owner to update on how they're managing that risk.
So it's a great idea. Thank you, Richard. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Eason, for the question. Yeah, I think the way I'd contextualise it is that I think the financial challenge, not just for Monmouthshire Council, but for probably most, if not all, councils across the UK, is severe. Both in terms of looking at next year, but equally in terms of projections for public funding, public spending for the subsequent 2 years. I think Chancellor has been quite clear in terms of outlining, the path that those finances take. So it's absolutely right, and equally that is mirrored, I think, by the update to our medium-term financial plan models. So you talked to the £14 million next year, and we see levels of budget deficit beyond then in the subsequent years. So, as I said, we're not alone. The challenging is significant / severe. It's for that reason as to why I think it's been scored in the way that it has. To your point in terms of whether we are, depending on which week you read a paper at the moment, I think it was Nottingham last week, wasn't it? Maybe Birmingham a couple of weeks prior to that. But I think there's always unique circumstances if you track back around those councils and as to what has led them to, I guess, a degree of financial failure or at least intervention, which is what a Section 114 notice brings. Look, we're not in that situation. What we're simply doing is, to the extent of some of those other councils haven't done, which is actually face up to the facts of the severity of the situation and then put plans in place to deal with that. It's very much the reason as to why we've instigated a lot of the processes that we have. It's why I probably talked a little longer than I needed to earlier on in the meeting when providing my update, because it gives the committee the comfort and the reassurances in terms of the steps that we're taking. I talked earlier about in-year, and I talked about next year, and then obviously there's challenges beyond that then for the medium term. And I guess the thing to highlight is that Governance and Audit Committee having its presiding over, I guess, and gaining its own comfort and reassurance in terms of the arrangements in place. That will happen when the meeting of the committee convenes in January, because you will be looking over the draft financial strategy. The draft financial strategy responds to Councillor Easton's very specific question in terms of providing assurances as to how we're going to look to act and move forward, and in responding to the scale and extent of the challenges that we're facing. We are not in the same space as a Birmingham, far from it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and very reassuring, so thank you, Peter. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments from members, so let's look to conclude. A few remarks from me. Once again, thanks for the paper, Richard. I thought it was excellent. A lot to digest, and the paper does reflect, to my mind anyway, a marked shift in risk profile in an adverse direction. And what we're seeing is increasing levels of uncertainty and previous identified risks crystallising into issues. In this type of situation, we do need a robust risk management framework, but also fundamentally a real focus on officers determining and following through on an appropriate set of actions. That's critical. And I look to you, Richard, and team to really help officers shape those actions in an appropriate way and help hold officers to account. And clearly, we as Governors Audit Committee have a role to play in that regard as well. And I'm also, yet again, to reiterate points I made earlier, I am pleased with the acknowledgement that further work needs to be done in terms of improving aspects of the risk framework, for example, risk appetite and various other components. And this committee is always here to provide support, advice, guidance as you deem appropriate, Richard, in terms of taking that work forward. And I do look forward to receiving further updates in due course. So thank you. On that note, we can move on to agenda item 7. Agenda item 7 is the Ombudsman for Wales annual letter. I understand this paper is being introduced by Matt Gatehouse, Chief Officer for People, Performance and Partnerships, who has a heavy cold. So I'm glad you're there and not in the council chamber, Matt. But over to you. Assume we've read the paper, but please summarise the key points for us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And it seemed a sensible choice to sit at home rather than risk spreading my germs via the chamber. So in terms of this report, it's a requirement of the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales that we make available an annual letter that they produce summarising the complaints they've received relating to us as an authority, and we make that available to both Cabinet and to the Governance and Audit Committee to give both groups the opportunity to look at those, to discuss them, and if there are any considerations or recommendations that you need to make to officers as a committee, that we write back to the Ombudsman alerting them to the recommendations you've made. So this is a letter which is sent to all local authorities in Wales, setting out the findings about that particular organisation. It gives a breakdown of the complaints and the different sort of subject categories. Just to give you a sense of sort of the volume, we saw 23 complaints go through to the Public Service Ombudsman in 22-23. That was 3 more than the previous year. So these things tend to sort of bounce around a sort of roughly around an average figure in that range. To give a context of how that compares to other authorities, when you put that in a number per 1,000 population, our figure is 0.25 complaints per 1,000 of population. And that places us about one of the third or fourth lowest in Wales. They range from 0.17 per 1,000, so lowest number of complaints in Wales at 0.17, and the highest of 0.49. And you'll be able to see that in the Ombudsman's report. Of those complaints that went through, they decided to intervene in one of the 23 complaints that they received. And that was closed through early resolution. So there were no complaints upheld, but one where an early resolution following a letter from the Ombudsman resulted with the complaint being dealt with. And you'll see that sort of various tables, both in the cover report and the Ombudsman's letter itself, giving the breakdown of those complaints. And just a reminder, I suppose, to those watching us home as much as the committee, this sort of sits alongside the annual complaints report, which you receive and which as a committee you've provided feedback on, and in its next iteration will come through as a very much a reworked report in line with the feedback of the committee. So, Chair, if you're okay with that, I'll close there and just be available to answer any questions coming through yourself.
Great, thanks, Matt. So we have one question. Tony, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I noticed, Richard, there are quite a number of complaints through adult services all the way to the bottom of COVID-19. Do you have any indication of length of time it took to settle those complaints or sort those complaints out, whichever may be the right words? And also, it also says there were 6 complaints for code of conduct. Are you an indication of how long it took to deal with those complaints? And would you believe that dealing with all those complaints were dealt with adequately in a timely fashion, or do you believe there's been delays that are unnecessary with the Ombudsman?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, actually. I suppose comes to the rub of some of the changes that the committee have asked us to look at in terms of the authority's own annual complaints report, because what you'll see is the Commissioner's letter doesn't comment on issues of timeliness. If I had to look at the question of, are we confident that all of our complaints are dealt with in a timely manner? We do have sort of timescales for resolving complaints within 20 working days. The next report that comes to you as a committee will give you a sort of figure as a percentage on that. I don't have that to hand, but one thing I would say is we, for the most part, when complaints proceed to stage 2 in terms of internal investigation, they are investigated by an officer of the authority, one unconnected with the subject matter, and we clearly don't have a huge amount of capacity. So I wouldn't expect that you'll be bringing forward a figure showing you that 100% of complaints are dealt with on time, but I don't have the figure to hand. But capacity is one of the biggest challenges, and for us it's balancing that issue of resource versus timeliness, because it's quite costly to send and bring out a lot of internal or external investigators who may have a little bit more time on their hands, but command a higher fee than our own officers for investigating these things.
Do you believe that capacity, therefore, is a detriment to any complaints made forward? And should there be a reasonable time scale in all complaints, that there's a time when they should be cut off rather than allowed to drag on and drag on and drag on?
I suppose in terms of the first part, I wouldn't say the timeliness of that affects the outcome. I would like to believe we get to a fair position for the complainant. But there are occasions when the 20-day limit will have been exceeded. Generally, of the greatest importance is to get to the right outcome. In terms of the detail sat behind that, what I would say is the report before you today is sort of the Ombudsman's one. When we bring forward the authority's own complaints report and outline some of the detail and the efficacy of our own processes, we'll be able to answer that with Annette present as well. Annette Evans, for those who are not aware, is our customer relations manager that oversees the complaints process, and we'll be able to put before the committee then a greater range of evidence to get into some of that detail about our processes.
Do you believe that maliciousness plays a part in a lot of these complaints being put forward?
I don't have any firm evidence to believe that's the case, Councillor Easton, so I wouldn't be able to make a judgment on that.
Okay, thank you. Some good questions there, but we'll leave it till a later time. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Matt. So I'm not seeing anyone else wants to come in at this point. So I think we can note the contents of the annual letter and confirm we don't wish to provide any feedback to the Ombudsman. Great. Let's move on to then item 8. Item 8 is the annual report in respect of use of RIPA related powers. It's an annual report, albeit it does cover a few financial years. Could I welcome Geraint Edwards, the authority solicitor, to the meeting? Geraint, please assume we've read paper, but please feel free to set out the key points and what you want to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. This item is an annual report for this committee reporting on the Council's recent use of powers authorised under the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. Now, by way of context, I should briefly outline the purpose of this Act. In a nutshell, it's the main piece of UK legislation which controls how public authorities exercise their powers to conduct certain types of covert surveillance. REPA regulates how the authority exercises such powers in the context of serious criminal investigations. So these will include investigations for most trading standards offences, as well as offences of fraud, food hygiene, fly tipping and health and safety. And what the Act does is that it provides for a two-stage sign-off process for any proposed use of the powers by both a senior council officer as well as a Justice of the Peace in the Magistrates' Court. Now, both sets of authorisations need to be given in writing and in advance of any proposed use of the powers. And in addition to the sign-off, any authorisations need to be actively reviewed by the Council and withdrawn when no longer deemed necessary. The purpose of that process is to ensure that the exercise of covert surveillance powers is both a necessary and proportionate limitation on a person's right to privacy under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, if the Council fails to comply with those provisions, it does run the risk of having any criminal evidence gathered through covert surveillance being ruled inadmissible by a court of law. Now, under Home Office guidance, the Council is required to maintain a formal written policy outlining its internal procedures for ensuring compliance with the Act. And the Home Office also recommends that members conduct an annual review on the use of REPA, as well as annual renewed approval of the internal policy document. And the Council is also subject to periodic inspection by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, or the IPCO, to ensure compliance. And the Home Office guidance also requires Council members to be informed on the outcome of any inspection. Now, under MCC's REPA policy, member oversight of REPA is divided between the Cabinet and the Governance and Audit Committee. Cabinet is the organ for review and approval of the policy, and to which the outcome of inspections is to be reported. And as a matter of fact, Cabinet last considered the matter at its meeting on the 8th of November, where it approved the current policy and noted the positive outcome of the IPCO's recent inspection in August and in September of this year. And the updated policy and the outcome letter from the Commissioner, Leatherton, is attached for your members' reference in Appendices 1 and 2 of this report. Now, the Governance and Audit Committee, for its part, is designated by the policy as the appropriate organ for reporting on the recent use of REPA authorisations. And as can be seen from the reports, these powers are seldom used by the Council. There were no REPA authorisations in financial years 2020 to 2021 or 2021 to 22. In the financial year of 2022-23, there was one use of REPA authorisations, and this single authorisation was obtained for directed surveillance relating to an investigation for the potential offence of underage sale of vapes, as well as the supply for psychoactive effect of nitrous oxide canisters. Now, for reference, the surveillance that was carried out under that particular authorisation did not disclose any offence being committed, so no prosecution materialised from it. To conclude, Chair, committee is recommended to receive this report and to note its contents and make any observations it considers appropriate. If there are any questions, Chair, I'm happy to assist. Thank you. Diolch.
Thank you, Geraint. So, questions or comments, please, from members? Tony.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the report. Could you highlight the legislation currently regarding the sale of nitrous oxide canisters and little tubes, and what sort of penalties can be put on retailers who are actually continue to do this? Because I understand it's now been banned from sales or certain aspects banned from sales.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. I do not have the particular details of the offence to hand, as it would have been a matter that would have been investigated by the Trading Standards Unit. However, what I can confirm is for an offence of that nature, it would be classed as a serious criminal offence with a penalty that could be in excess of 6 months imprisonment. However, what I am able to do is to follow up, if that is okay, Councillor Eason, with a full answer in email.
And furthermore, in terms of sales of vaping and selling vape products and supplying vape products, the legislation regarding those, are they severe enough to prevent for youngsters particularly getting access to them?
That is a good question, Councillor Eason, and in effect it is rhetorical to an extent in that all we can report on is what the legislation says. Whether it is adequate is a matter ultimately for the legislature, but as in the case of canisters, I'm happy to follow up by email confirming the actual penalties that apply for the underage sale of vapes. Again, as is the case with canisters, it would be classed as a serious criminal offence, i.e. an offence which can potentially carry a penalty of 6 months imprisonment or more.
Okay, John.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so we look to conclude this item. Oh, beg your pardon, Sarah.
Sorry, Chair, there's always one, isn't there? I was looking at a section of the report that deals with how social media information can be used. I'm presuming that means an individual's personal Facebook account where they've chosen to leave that public, their posts and so on. And I'm presuming that might be used, for instance, in looking at benefits claims and so on. Is that the likely use of that kind of information? Which led me to question, does Torvine have the same policy, and how is this policy relevant? What policy is the Shared Benefits Service operating under? Is it Monmouthshire's policy or Torvine's policy? Or are they the same?
I'm grateful for that question from Councillor Birch, and unfortunately I do not have the answer to hand, but I can make inquiries if you wish. As to the actual policies used by the financial departments, but it would be a matter for any counter-fraud investigation team within the finance department. I don't know if Peter Davis might be in a position to answer that question.
No, I think Geraint, similar to what you've suggested, I think we probably just take that one away from the meeting and just provide subsequent responses, no problem.
Yep, that sounds reasonable to me, as long as you're happy with that, Sarah.
Very happy, thank you.
Good. Okay. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm looking to conclude this item. Okay, so thanks for the report, Geraint. Thanks for the voiceover. I think we can notice contents, but I don't think this committee wishes to make any particular observations or recommendations aside from addressing the one or two minor points members have already sort of flagged. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 9 is for forward work plan. We don't usually spend much time on this. It looks appropriate to me, noting that there's some tweaks following sort of discussions at today's meeting, which I'm sure Wendy will follow through on. Agenda item 10 is the minutes from a previous meeting. I'm content with them. They're in a much more streamlined format. I'm not looking for people to propose and second it. Unless they shout now, I'm going to approve them on the committee's behalf.
Fine.
Yep, all good. And the final matter then is to confirm the date of the next meeting is the 11th of January, few weeks away, and to say thank you for your time and contribution. Look forward to seeing you next year. Not beginning of December.